Eddie Kidd's day job was, when you come to think about it, a bit silly. Brave, reckless, thrilling even, but silly. Still, all of our day jobs are silly in some way, and leaping over various obstacles on a machine not designed for flight at least brings you adulation. Unlike sitting in an office speaking to goofs on the phone, putting cans on a supermarket shelf, or helping the sick. The sick are rubbish, they're sick for a reason. They're rubbish. Eddie's job was so cool that he ended up getting a computer game, a 1984 computer game by the good people at Martech. Before we get to that, let's have a brief overview of this daredevil with a dirty engine betwixt his thighs, and why he was deemed cool enough to get his own computer game while Jane in accounts still patiently waits for Electronic Arts to ring her about making Sage Accountancy Pro 1997. Eddie Kidd was born in Islington in 1959. Eddie exited his mother's birth canal in a way you'd expect Eddie to, by doing a wheelie on a Ducati. I mean, he obviously didn't. They don't have Ducati shops in mothers' wombs, but let's pretend he did. He performed his very first stunt at the age of 14 in 1978. He leapt gaily over buses and cars over 12,000 times in his career, breaking world records hither and dither, to the point that Norris McWhirter of the Guinness Book of World Records probably camped outside his house just in case he attempted to leap over the morning bin collection with panache and skill and bravery. He competed in a 1993 pay-per-view event against the son of Evel Knievel, who was genetically predisposed to put his life in danger on a motorbike, much like his dear old dad. The pair competed against each other by doing a trio of leaps each, with the winner being the rider who had the highest cumulative distance travelled in the air. Eddie won by 6 feet. His skills also saw Eddie get work in Hollywood, standing in for the likes of Harrison Ford, Michael Caine and Val Kilmer in motorcycle set pieces as a stunt rider, along with a pair of Bond films, those being The Living Daylights and GoldenEye. He also took the lead role in a 1981 movie of his own, in the rather poorly received Riding High. Such an incredible career, though, carries with it a high risk. A risk that eventually caught up with Eddie. Even with his level of skill, he is but a mere human, and humans make errors. Even a tiny error can be devastating. In the summer of 1996 at Long Marsden Airfield, Eddie landed badly from a routine jump and knocked himself unconscious. His bike continued upright with him on it over a steep embankment, and the resultant fall gave Eddie serious head and pelvic injuries. Eddie fell into a coma from which he may never have woken from, according to the doctors treating him. And yet 3 months later, indeed, he did regain that consciousness. But all was not right. Eddie was left paralysed and with brain damage, but his spirit remains empowered. He received an OBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List in 2012. He carried the Olympic torch through Lewes in Sussex in the run-up to the 2012 Olympics, and he even took part and completed the 2011 London Marathon. Starting with the other competitors, Eddie eventually finished by walking the distance over the next 4 weeks. He called it his greatest stunt yet. He's probably not wrong. So yes, for much of the 80s and 90s, Eddie Kidd was rightly a British megastar that shone ever so brightly. The computer game, given the era where everything got a game, was perhaps inevitable. And it was released by Martech, the pioneer of early computer game licenses. And they've given us Zoids, Jeff Cape's Strongman, and yes, Samantha Fox Strip Poker, all titles that we've covered so far. The game was released on the Acorn Electron, the BBC Micro, MSX, the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum. And that game's title is the Eddie Kidd Jump Challenge, but Eddie Kidd is not going to challenge you like your Evel Knievel's son. You are in fact challenged to be Eddie himself and do Eddie's 80s activities. You have to iron his car keys, you have to bathe his kids, you have to rail his ex-wife, dancer Debbie Ash, you have to buy a train ticket to the seaside so he can have a drink and not have to worry about the car. No, in fact, Eddie's life is not tackled beyond the obvious. His love of going up very quickly on a two-wheeled vehicle into the sky in order to cover vast distances and make crowds that are watching go, ooh. There are no opponents in this game. You do not race anyone. It's you inside Eddie's fireproof suit and a ramp going up and then a ramp going down for you to land on. Oh, and a lot of vehicles in between them. Vroom and indeed vroom. You shall start as Eddie himself did, by practicing. We can't have you let loose with other people's cars without practicing. You'll no doubt end up damaging their paintwork with your dislodged teeth. In some versions, like the Commodore 64 one, you'll start on a motorbike, but on the Spectrum one, you'll be trying to impress your fellow schoolchildren by vaulting over metal barrels on a cycle. Metal barrels that, unlike other video games, don't explode if you brush them with a ghost scrotum. Once you've made enough schoolgirls faint from the vapours from you jumping over barrels, you can wrap your legs around an engine and play big boy silly buggers. There's a fair old run-up for Eddie to build up speed on, while changing gears, checking the wind speed, and maybe pull a couple of wheelies in order to make the adult barmaids faint from the vapours too. Then you must adjust your body to lift the bewheeled rocket at the top of the ramp and twitchily adjust yourself while making friends with the airborne finches before making sure your testes aren't reduced to Pepto-Bismol coloured sludge when you touch down on the other ramp. Each leap adds another few cars below you, and that's the game. There's nothing more to it. The background is a diarrhea and sky blue city on the Commodore 64 version and a Windows 95 desktop tribute on the other formats, never changing. There's no rags to riches progression from Islington alleyways to local fairs to huge screaming Vegas crowds here. It is a lonely experience for your digital Eddie kid, showing off to absolutely nobody. Nor do we get any variation on what Eddie leaps over. Is barrels then vehicles? Nothing else. There's no death-defying soaring over chasms or something a bit more unrealistically comical maybe, like a shark tank or a volcano or a pen full of rejected Big Brother contestants from 2000 to 2010. Perhaps it could have done with a Kickstart 2 or Trials HD form of course where you do multiple jumps and do a variety of stunts to keep your biker upright. There's not even a series of rivals that could have added a bit of personality. It's a 1985 game, so it's early days in this kind of title. I couldn't help but think that maybe if it was developed like 4 or 5 years later by a different company, some of the ideas we probably would have got. But as it is, Eddie Kid Jump Challenge is one basic bitch. The game came packaged with stickers, numbered cards and competition opportunities for you to send your saved runs to. Maybe you could win a BMX, eh? Then you could jump over things, just like dear old Eddie. The game coming with all this extra effluvia almost feels like an admission that there's not a lot to this piece of software. The extra gubbins feels almost like an apology. Don't get me wrong, this leaping thing was pretty much all Eddie did, so it's perfectly reflective of that one thing that Eddie Kid did very, very well. Also, it does a very serviceable version of that task, and it's a pretty stiff challenge in the later levels. But that's where you incorporate some of that flair, like some of the bits I mentioned before. It needs a bit more filling out, if you know what I mean. The big, chunky, bold sprites in the Commodore 64 version probably give that version the edge over the others in this least stupid Love Island contestant competition. It's not really good, I'm afraid. Yamaha hardly made a good purchase when she bought this. The joke there, which looked better written down, was Yamaha hardly, which is Yamaha. I'll keep quiet from now on. The January 1985 Commodore user said that they weren't sure there is enough lasting challenge to this game. That slight worry aside, it is still bound to be a great hit with Eddie Kidd fans. They gave it a 4 out of 5 for value for money. The December 1984 Crash magazine gave it a 56% and said, "It's a good simulation, but as a game, it's not overly exciting and not particularly addictive." So that's that then. So what's next, children? Well, as you've been a good little boy watching Eddie Kidd do his stunts, you can have some chocolate. Kinder chocolate. In a German-only Game Boy Color platformer featuring happy hippos. Go on then. Like, subscribe, and thanks, bye.